It's Monday, 2 December. Welcome to the President's Daily Brief. I'm Mike Baker, your eyes and ears on the world stage. All right, let's get briefed. Today, we'll start things off with news out of Syria, where rebel forces have taken control of Aleppo, that's the country's second largest city, and are continuing their advance. We'll break down what this means for Assad's regime, Russia's involvement, and the future of this long and brutal conflict. Later in the show, Ukraine's President Zelensky, for the first time since the war began, said he's willing to cede Ukrainian territory to Russia to end the conflict. We'll break down his remarks. Plus, in Georgia's capital, Tbilisi, thousands of demonstrators protested the government's decision to halt EU, that's European Union, accession talks, leading to barricades, broken windows, and fireworks outside of the parliament. We'll explore what's at stake for Georgia's future. And in today's back of the brief, former President Donald Trump names Kash Patel, a former defense official and federal prosecutor, as his pick to lead the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. But first, today's PDB Spotlight. A major development in the Syrian civil war. Remember that? It's been going on for years. It's just been off our radar. Rebel forces have captured Aleppo, Syria's second largest city. Now, this marks a significant and unexpected shift in a conflict that has devastated the country for over a decade. According to reports, more than 300 people have been killed since intense fighting erupted on Wednesday, including at least 20 civilians. The Syrian opposition forces are now advancing south following their victory in Aleppo, with reports indicating that they've seized control of several towns in the countryside near Hama, that's Syria's fourth largest city. This push highlights the momentum of the rebel coalition led by the Islamist militant group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, that's called HTS for short, because every militant group wants to use an acronym. Far from slowing down, the group seems focused on solidifying its gains and expanding its territorial control. The Syrian military has reportedly rushed reinforcements to the region in an attempt to stall the insurgents' momentum. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with HTS, it might be because the group began under a different name, Jabhat al-Nusra, commonly known in the West as al-Nusra Front. Now, established in 2012, they served as the Syrian branch of al-Qaeda before rebranding, yes, even terrorist groups rebrand, and distancing themselves from their original affiliation. However, the group remains a distinctly Islamist organization, a fact underscored this weekend when members of HTS were seen waving the flag of jihad in central Aleppo, celebrating their victory. The fall of Aleppo is not just a symbolic blow to President Assad's regime, but also a major strategic loss. Aleppo, a city with deep historical and economic significance, had been firmly under government control since 2016, when Assad's forces recaptured it with the critical assistance of Russian air power. Now, to understand the gravity of this development, we have to look at the broader Syrian civil war. The conflict began in 2011, basically as peaceful protests during the Arab Spring, calling for political reform and greater freedoms under Assad's authoritarian rule. However, the government's violent crackdown transformed those peaceful protests into a full-scale civil war, engulfing the nation in a brutal conflict that's killed hundreds of thousands and displaced millions. The war quickly became a proxy battleground for regional and global powers. Assad's regime has been supported by Russia and Iran, with Moscow providing military hardware, air power, and advisors. On the other side, various rebel factions have received support from Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, while the United States and its allies have focused on combating ISIS and assisting Kurdish forces. The current rebel offensive in Aleppo highlights the evolving dynamics of this war. HTS and its allies launched a coordinated attack that overwhelmed government forces in a matter of days. The group's ability to organize and execute such a significant operation suggests that rebel forces, long thought to be fragmented, have regained strength. Now, this is particularly bad news for Russia, which has invested heavily in propping up Assad and his regime. The fall of Aleppo undermines years of Russian-backed military gains and raises questions about the regime's stability. In response, Moscow has begun launching airstrikes against rebel forces in several Syrian cities, signaling that Russia is doubling down to prevent further losses. As we mentioned, another key player in Syria's fate is Iran. Oh, well, look at the Iranian regime, with their fingers in yet more chaos in the Middle East. A long-standing ally, of course, of President Assad. On Sunday, the Islamic Republic showed its support for Assad's regime by sending its foreign minister to Damascus in a high-profile visit. As the situation unfolds, the fall of Aleppo and the subsequent rebel advance into the countryside near Hama could mark a turning point in the war, reigniting battles in other contested regions and shifting the balance of power. All right, coming up next, Zelensky signals a willingness to cede territory to Russia, and protests erupt in Georgia over halted EU talks, with barricades and fireworks outside the parliament. I'll have those stories when we come back. Welcome back to the PDB. Turning to Ukraine, where in a landmark shift, President Zelensky suggested for the first time that Ukraine might consider temporarily ceding Russian-occupied territories in exchange for NATO-style security guarantees. On Friday, in an interview with Sky News, Zelensky proposed a ceasefire agreement that would place the territory currently under Ukrainian control under a, quote, NATO umbrella. Zelensky stated, quote, if we want to stop the hot stage of the war, we should take under NATO umbrella the territory of Ukraine that we have under our control. He emphasized that this approach would not involve permanent territorial concessions, but would serve as a stepping stone to regaining full sovereignty. This proposal marks a notable departure from Kyiv's long-held policy of reclaiming all Ukrainian territory, including Crimea, and the 4 regions annexed by Russia in 2022. Previously, Zelensky's administration maintained a firm stance against any compromise, vowing to fight until Ukraine's internationally recognized borders were restored. Zelensky's remarks align with growing European support for a negotiated resolution. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson told The Telegraph last week that European troops, including British forces, could form a peacekeeping contingent to secure an 800-mile buffer zone between Ukrainian and Russian forces. Johnson stressed that troops should not engage directly with Russia, but rather be a multinational peacekeeping force that could monitor the ceasefire line and bolster Ukraine's defenses, stating, quote, Western countries must ensure that any security guarantees prevent Russia from regrouping and reigniting hostilities, urging clarity on the terms of protection. Zelensky echoed these concerns, warning that any ceasefire must provide lasting protection against renewed Russian aggression. Switching to English during his interview, he noted informal proposals for ceasefire agreements from other nations, but questioned their enforceability, stating, quote, the question is ceasefire where? We need NATO protection very much, otherwise Putin will come back, end quote. Zelensky hinted that an arrangement involving individual security guarantees from NATO members, such as the U.S., Britain, France, and Germany, could be a viable alternative to full NATO membership. Zelensky's proposal comes as President-elect Donald Trump prepares to take office in January with promises to end the war on, quote, day one, as we've been tracking here on the PDB. Reports suggest that Trump's team is exploring a peace deal that would freeze the front lines, delay Ukraine's NATO membership aspirations for 20 years, and increase U.S. military aid to deter further Russian aggression. Trump's plan reportedly includes deploying European and British forces to enforce the ceasefire, potentially creating a buffer zone between the Ukrainian and Russian troops. Zelensky's openness to temporary territorial concessions and security guarantees underscores Ukraine's recalibration in navigating a deeply challenging geopolitical landscape. However, hurdles obviously remain. Questions linger over whether Russia would honor a ceasefire or use it as an opportunity to regroup. I don't know. Do questions really linger over whether Putin would honor any agreement? As the clock ticks toward Trump's inauguration, international efforts to negotiate a sustainable resolution are gaining momentum. Whether Zelensky's proposal will pave the way for peace or lead to further complications obviously remains uncertain. Okay, shifting to the nation of Georgia. Thousands of demonstrators took to the streets in the capital Tbilisi and across the country after the government's decision to halt European Union accession talks for the next 4 years. On Saturday, demonstrators gathered outside Parliament, breaking windows, setting off fireworks, and building barricades. Riot police responded with water cannons and tear gas as tensions escalated, with a small fire breaking out in the Parliament building, possibly from fireworks launched by demonstrators. Protesters also burned an effigy of the billionaire founder of the ruling Moscow-leaning Georgian Dream Party on the Parliament steps. The protests marked the largest show of dissent since the Georgian Dream Party's re-election in October, in a vote that opposition leaders claim was rigged. Western countries have since called for an investigation. The government's decision to freeze EU membership talks, citing alleged blackmail by the EU and accusing opposition factions of pushing the country toward conflict with Russia on behalf of Western allies, has deepened divisions in a nation historically aligned with Western values. Notably, EU membership, enshrined in Georgia's constitution, remains overwhelmingly popular among its citizens. The backlash extends beyond the streets. Georgian media reports senior diplomats in countries including the U.S. resigned in protest, alongside over 200 serving diplomats and hundreds of civil servants from key ministries who signed open letters condemning the ruling party's decision. The State Department has since suspended its strategic partnership with Georgia, while the EU expressed deep regret over the move. During the unrest, Georgia's president, a pro-EU figure with limited ceremonial power, vowed to remain in office beyond her term, echoing the illegitimacy of the new parliament and frustration over the stalled EU talks. Georgia's prime minister accused the pro-EU opposition leaders of attempting to incite revolution, drawing parallels to Ukraine's 2014 Maidan protests that ousted a pro-Russian president. The prime minister stated, quote, "Some people want a repeat of that scenario in Georgia, but there will be no Maidan in Georgia," end quote. The Georgian Dream Party's decision to freeze EU talks caps months of deteriorating relations with the West and has fueled perceptions that Georgia is veering into Moscow's orbit. The protests have also brought attention to the heavy-handed tactics of Georgian authorities. According to Reuters, over 100 demonstrators were detained in the capital, with reports of police brutality circulating widely. The country's ombudsman described the treatment of protesters as, quote, "disturbing," while the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe expressed deep concern over the escalating unrest. With the country's diplomatic ties unraveling and public dissent mounting, Georgia faces a critical crossroads. The protests signal a clear demand for accountability and alignment with European ideals, but the ruling party remains steadfast in resisting what it perceives as Western interference. All right, coming up next in the back of the brief, President-elect Trump taps Kash Patel, a former defense official and prosecutor, as his pick to lead the FBI. I'll have the details when we come back. In today's back of the brief, President-elect Trump has nominated Kash Patel, a staunch ally and outspoken critic of the FBI, as the Bureau's next director, signaling a sharp pivot in the Bureau's leadership. Patel, widely known for his role in exposing the FBI's surveillance of Trump's 2016 campaign, is a seasoned federal prosecutor with a track record of combating terrorism and advocating for reform. His nomination comes with Trump's pledge to eliminate entrenched corruption within federal agencies. Trump announced the decision on Truth Social on Saturday, calling Patel a, quote, "brilliant lawyer, investigator, and America First fighter," end quote. Patel's career spans key roles in national security, intelligence, and counterterrorism. As a federal prosecutor, he led prosecutions against al-Qaeda and ISIS operatives. He later served as senior director for counterterrorism at the National Security Council and as chief of staff to acting Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller. In his book, Government Gangsters, The Deep State, the Truth, and the Battle for Our Democracy, Patel detailed his allegations of corruption within federal agencies. In a 2023 interview, he called for shutting down the FBI's headquarters and reopening it as a, quote, "museum of the deep state." Patel's nomination underscores Trump's commitment to reshaping the FBI. Trump ally Mike Davis praised Patel on X as, quote, "unquestionably qualified," and aligned with Trump's vision for widespread reforms. Patel is expected to work closely with Pam Bondi, Trump's nominee for Attorney General, to bring sweeping changes to the Bureau. It's important to note that the current FBI director, Christopher Wray, appointed in 2017 by then-President Trump, is serving a term of up to 10 years. For Patel to take the helm, well, Wray must resign or be removed, setting up a potentially contentious transition. The Senate confirmation process could also present some challenges for Patel, whose strong loyalty to Trump and willingness to criticize federal agencies have made him a bit of a lightning rod for Democrats. And that, my friends, is the President's Daily Brief for Monday, 2 December. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at pdb@thefirsttv.com. And of course, to listen to the show ad-free, become a premium member of the President's Daily Brief by visiting pdbpremium.com. I'm Mike Baker, and I'll be back later this afternoon with a PDB Afternoon Bulletin. Until then, stay informed, stay safe, stay cool.